Welcome to A Little Nutrition Talk Radio, the podcast for health seekers who want to cut through the noise of nutrition, diet, and health confusion and take charge of their well-being. I'm your host, Susan Watson, registered dietitian and certified eating disorder specialist. As the founder of A Little Nutrition Inc., a multidisciplinary healthcare clinic, I believe that health is multifaceted, and that's why our team takes a collaborative approach to integrating both nutrition and mental health support across all stages of life. We believe that health is so much more than the numbers on the scale. Our weight-neutral philosophy prioritizes providing inclusive care that empowers our clients to focus on what truly supports their well-being on their own terms. On this podcast, we're going to explore questions about health, nutrition, mental wellness, and offer a refreshing new perspective on taking care of yourself. It's not about striving for perfection. It's about discovering what works best for you. So you're in the right place. Grab a cup of tea, get comfy, and let's jump into today's conversation. Welcome back to the podcast. If you've ever found yourself staring at your plate, wondering what you're about to eat is going to make you feel worse, or if you've slowly cut out more foods out of your life just in case, this episode is for you. Today, I'm talking with Wendy Bussey, a registered dietitian who's spent nearly 30 years helping people untangle the fear, confusion, and overwhelm that can come with food sensitivities. We're diving into what happens when food becomes something you fear instead of enjoy, and how to become reclaiming that peace with eating again. From real-life signs that your relationship with food might be out of balance, to the common reasons people get stuck in the loop of restriction and anxiety, Wendy shares insights and hope for anyone who's ever felt trapped in their symptoms. So let's get into it. Hi, Wendy. How are you doing?
I am good. Thank you so much for inviting me to your podcast today. It's a real privilege.
Oh, I'm so glad that you're able to come on and have this conversation. Why don't you start off by telling us a little bit about yourself and your practice and what you do, and then we can dive into our topic.
Okay, thanks. And as you mentioned, I've been working in food sensitivity for a little over 30 years. I don't like saying that. It makes me sound so old, but that is the truth. And I've always been really drawn to what I call the gray area. So not so much the black and white, where, we have definite clinical guidelines and we know how to help the clients, but those clients that really seem to be falling through the cracks in that they're struggling with something that's not clearly defined. And with that, when talking with people, something that came up over and over again was people mentioning this vicious cycle of fear, then food restriction, worsening symptoms that led to more fear, and just going around and around, and really devastating impact on their quality of life. Many of these people, their lives were really dominated by thinking about food, like wondering, oh, what should I eat? And if I have this, will it make me sick? And oh, maybe I should have that. And I better go to the internet, I better find out more information about that. So their lives being dominated by food, having difficulty meal planning, grocery shopping, cooking, that becoming such a burden, often social isolation because they're avoiding eating out, or traveling because to try to explain and accommodate restrictions is so difficult. So this vicious cycle having a very devastating impact on people's quality of life, and that understanding more about that cycle and then helping people to break out of it and get back to a good relationship with food really became a driving force for my career.
That's very interesting. And it's so much more than just maybe a food allergy. When there's that food sensitivity, it really can start to impact one's life. And I feel like in our practice, we started to notice this when we were exploring helping people with food intolerances and food allergies, and noticed that it was more than just what to eat. That relationship with food really became a problem, and looked into bringing on mental health supports to help with anxiety and fear. So I'm really curious today to be talking to you about how you practice and how you help people do that, because our model has been to bring in other supports, and I'm curious to see and hear about the supports that you offer. So why don't we talk about what are some everyday signs that someone's relationship with food has become more of a fear than nourishment? Why don't you tell me a little bit about what you noticed when that starts to come up?
Yeah, and It's the vicious cycle that we talked about, that food fear cycle. And as I was saying, for a lot of people, it feels like food is just dominating their life. A lot of their time, a lot of their energy is spent either on research, trying to figure it out, or just, thinking, what should I eat? Like a common, like this would be an example sort of thought process, like, well, maybe I should have carrot for supper tonight. Well, last time I had carrot, I think, I felt ill, and oh, what did I read about carrot? And maybe it should be the green bean. So that constant kind of almost confusion and indecision about what to eat. Sometimes though, then that can flip side to that is just almost not wanting to think about food at all, and almost ignoring food and eating that can also be part of a very limited diet. So people can kind of even flip back and forth sometimes between that kind of hyper arousal about food and hypo arousal as well. Another common sign I would say for people is when they think about eating or an upcoming meal, rather than pleasant anticipation, is their body going into like almost the alarm bells starting to go off, and becoming and feeling very on edge when they think about food. And that's something often people don't notice. We have so many things in our environment, right, that can cause those alarm bells to go off. Sometimes it's hard to pinpoint food, especially because if food is a danger cue for you, then you're exposed to food all the time, right? Like just even not just your own food, other people are eating. There's ads about food. Like food is absolutely everywhere. So if that's a danger cue for you, then the alarm bells are going off all of the time. And then it can be hard to realize that one of those triggers for those alarm bells is food. So in summary, I would say that the biggest thing to watch for is just almost like, being on edge and just noticing, does food have an impact on that? And then, if your day seems to be consumed by thinking about food.
And I want to kind of just ask this question that's, I didn't put on our list of questions, but I think is important. How can we really assess or understand maybe the difference between being afraid or worried about a food that's going to make us feel ill or uncomfortable or have a symptom versus what you're talking about and it being more of maybe related to diet culture or disordered eating? Or are they kind of the same? I'm just curious.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think it might not be an exact answer to what you're saying, but if we look at food sensitivities from a biopsychosocial perspective, one aspect of that social piece is the incredible fear-mongering we have about food in our media. Mm-hmm. You don't have to go far on the internet to see a website of, don't eat this, these common foods that are destroying your gut, that are causing inflammation, that are doing this. Those messages are everywhere, and they can have a tremendous impact. So say, for example, you heard or read something that said that yellow foods cause problems in big toes. And obviously that's just a kind of a silly fictitious thing, right? But that's what you read about. Okay, fine. That thought goes into your subconscious. And then let's say a little while later, your big toe starts to hurt. Your brain can pull out that association, go, I bet it's the yellow foods, right? So that all of that fear mongering has a tremendous impact on our subconscious relationship, both our conscious and subconscious relationship with food, which really can impact, what we're restricting. It can impact how we're reacting to those foods, etc. So that might not be an exact answer to what you'd said, but I hope that suffices.
Well, what I'm hearing is that, I think almost everybody, mostly say North America, we're not hidden from it. It's everywhere. These messages show up in our everyday life, on media, in conversations, and we kind of learn these messages about food. And often I'll ask a client, like, well, where did you hear that piece of information that you're telling me about carrots, for
Mhm.
example. And I'm like, I don't know. I just remember hearing it somewhere. And so I think it's important to assess that knowledge if we can, to even go like, where did that come from? Because there's just so much out there right now. Can you maybe describe what it feels like to be on edge around food? How does it show up in daily life for the people that you work with?
And I would say if I can just take a step back, and because I would say feeling on edge around food is very similar to feeling on edge around any kind of a danger cue. So, and just as a little kind of explanation for what I'm talking about. So a conditioned danger cue is anything in our environment that our brain particular, especially at the subconscious level, associates with something that is dangerous. So that thing becomes a danger cue. And it's different for everybody, right? It's based on our experiences. And so for myself, one of my danger cues is pit bulls. I had a bad experience with a pit bull many years ago. You hear stories about pit bulls. So if I see a dog that looks like a pit bull, I avoid, I stay away. And if I am exposed, if I have to get close for whatever reason, is when we are exposed then to our danger cues, our body goes into fight or flight. I'm sure everybody listening is very familiar with those words. And that's our nervous system response to try to protect us. And it's both an emotional and a physical response. And so that physical response to it is what we often describe as, it feels like being on edge. And as I'd said just a few minutes ago, with food, it's a real challenging danger cue. Like I can avoid pit bulls fairly easily, right? So it doesn't have a major impact on my life. But certainly if your subconscious starts to associate food with illness, and then that food becomes a danger cue, and then food is everywhere. It's like you're continuously being bombarded by this danger cue.
That makes sense. I like how you used the conditioned response. It makes it quite meaningful. You have created this program, or I guess model, around conditioned food avoidance and sensitivity trap, or the CFAST model. Can you tell us a little bit about that, and what might a typical day look like for someone who might be stuck in this CFAST cycle?
Okay, so CFAST stands for Conditioned Food Avoidance and Sensitivity Trap. And so just a little bit of background is probably, 7, 8 years ago or so, it started as the food fear cycle. And there were 3 points on it. And over the last several years, I have revised it many, many times, and it's nearing its final form. Although I always do updates every year. I do. There's one little update that I want to make to it. Basically, what it is, and unfortunately, because this is a podcast, we can't show you, but and I'm sure in your show notes you'll have a link. It is a model that captures how conditioned food avoidance and conditioned food sensitivity can develop. And I use it as an education model to help people identify how they got stuck. And with that knowledge, then it helps them then to break out of it. I just wanted, if I could just take a moment to say, like, why is it the conditioned food avoidance and sensitivity trap? So actually, as I was trying to understand this vicious cycle of, it said like fear, restriction, worsening symptoms, it's actually one of my clients that said, you should look into do some reading on behavioral conditioning, like Pavlovian conditioning, Pavlov's dog. I'm sure everybody's heard of Pavlov's dog. And that is, the theory, as we've been talking about, where fear conditioning is a subset, where our brain can take something that is neutral, associate it with danger, and now that neutral thing becomes a danger cue. So we can take food, associate that with illness. Now food becomes a danger cue. That leads to what I call conditioned food avoidance. So we're avoiding food based on this food illness association. And then it can also lead to what I call a conditioned food sensitivity, where that hypervigilant nervous system actually, when that person consumes or even sometimes thinks about the danger, the food danger cue, then goes into that, the alarm bells go off. And as we said, that's a physical response. Like, that's not just thinking that you're feeling worse. Your body actually physically responds. And then that causes more symptoms, which just keeps that whole vicious cycle going around.
That makes a lot of sense. And I think I would assume that the longer somebody stays in the cycle, the longer or the harder it is to maybe uncondition those responses.
Yeah, I would agree. And it's not 100%, but I've had a lot of just email messages, and I'll give an example email just to illustrate it. And this individual had been diagnosed with a mast cell disease, and she went to joined some Facebook groups, and there was a lot of fear mongering about food. So she had stopped eating, but then about 2 weeks later, she ran into the free area of my website, and she sent me an email, said, "Thank you so much for that. I went out and enjoyed Sunday brunch." and I think so. I agree with you. I think when people sort of get trapped, kind of realize it, get out, it's not difficult. The longer somebody stays trapped, the more ingrained those associations between food and illness become. And it can take a little bit more work to start to reverse those. I wouldn't say reverse those associations, but make new associations with food. It still is definitely possible, but it's a bit of a longer process.
And I'm certain that there's a very big level of, I guess, trust and mistrust within the body that needs to be healed to be able to kind of work on those conditioned responses, because they probably feel almost automatic.
Yeah. Yeah, I absolutely agree. I talk a lot about rebuilding body and food trust, and those go hand in hand, because often what happens is, I think the food trust we've talked about a bit, like when you're reading all this negative stuff, you don't trust food anymore. But even so many people have been through the gamut of all the diagnoses, and maybe they've had food sensitivity testing and all of this, and then that changes our perception of our body, like from strong and healthy to weak and sick. Now, granted, there obviously are definitely conditions where a person is ill, right? I'm not denying, biological illness for sure, but it can, and what it is, like we said in the beginning, I talked about like the biopsychosocial model is, there's a definite biological piece, but then that can be made worse and expanded by the psychosocial piece, if that makes sense. And I wish I could show a graphic, because I have a graphic that shows, if you can imagine like a small circle, right? That you could say is the biological piece. And then as time goes on, it can expand, like sort of an outer layer of the whole psychosocial piece, which can, in some cases, significantly make the suffering much worse. So I also wanted to go back as well, if I could say, that we talked about food illness associations as being sort of talked about the brain making these associations that drive the conditioned food avoidance, drive the conditioned food sensitivities. That food illness association may be accurate. My model includes the fact that biological food sensitivities occur, right? So you could have a food illness association that is accurate, and avoiding that food is helpful. But there's often, for a lot of people, in addition to that, there's some inaccurate food illness associations, which are leading to excess avoidance.
Well, I can think of a personal example around like lactose and dairy for me. Like I'm very sensitive to lactose, and sometimes I can just think about it and feel a little bit nauseated, and I'm certain that's like a conditioned response, but it's protective for me. It's telling my body like, hey, that doesn't agree with you. But that can lead into many other kind of avoidances as well, and trying to determine which ones are helpful and which ones are maybe not helpful, I'm sure is the work that we're talking about here.
Yeah, and I like how you talk about that, like sorting out from the helpful for unhelpful, because unfortunately, I feel that in our industry, with psychologists as well, there's this push to label this type of food avoidance as an eating disorder. And
Mm-hmm.
as an eating disorder, it means that the restrictions are unwarranted, and that
Mm-hmm.
that the goal then is to reintroduce all food. But exactly as you have said, that's I don't again that's like, looking at the biopsychosocial, that's eliminating the bio. It's just looking at it as psychosocial. We need to have all of those pieces, and it becomes, as you said, sorting out what is helpful and working for you versus that which is just overly restricting your life and your joy and your love of food.
Yes, it definitely gets complicated in the eating disorder recovery world, separating out those foods that are definitely not helpful for the body because of a sensitivity or a food allergy, and realizing that they don't need to be challenged versus, I guess, ones that are not necessarily a medical restriction. But that, I feel like, is a whole other
Mm-hmm.
conversation,
Yeah.
but it is something to kind of note. So this is just a question I want to bring up because it's something that I feel we see in our practice quite a lot, and that, someone might have an illness or something going on with their gut or how they're processing food, but it always seems to be that food is automatically blamed every time we don't feel well, versus let's do a top-down assessment of what's going on in the body. Like, why does food get blamed so fast when we don't feel well? Why is it always the first thing that gets blamed?
Yeah, I that's an excellent question. And I think there's a lot of factors that go into it. One of them is that fear mongering in the media that we talked about. Is your subconscious absorbs all of the messages that you read. So just going back to that example of the yellow foods in the big toe, your subconscious kind of files that information somewhere. So often there's, several theories that a person has stored, negative theories about food. And then, when we suffer something, say we have an illness and something's not going right, our brain is programmed to cause and effect, right? Like, we want to find out why and what is happening and what is causing it. And so if you have all of this background of negative information about food, it just totally makes sense that the brain goes, oh, it must be food. So I think that's number one. And number two is that diet is easy to control, right? You think about, you can write down everything you eat, absolutely. You can keep a log of it, and you can, if your symptoms are, or your illness is food related, well, then you can go on to a restricted diet and you have complete control over what you eat. And for a lot of people, they would like it to be food related because it's tangible, it's concrete, they can do something about it, as opposed to, let's say it's, hormones or chemicals in the body, or, things that might be breathed in through the air, or viruses or bacteria, or all of these different things that we can't monitor it, and we really have very little control over it. So in summary, I think for a lot of people, they want it to be food. And third is, when we often restricted diets, we feel better.
Mm-hmm.
And so that then reinforces the idea that it's food related. But several research studies have shown that when people go onto a restricted diet, they feel better. So let's go back, like an open study. And so an open study would be one where just, let's say, a whole group of people here's XYZ restricted diet, and most will feel better on it. But if it's placebo controlled, where they also have people going on to a different diet, they also feel better too.
Mm-hmm.
And so, very strong evidence that there is a strong placebo effect of restricted diets. And I don't know if this is what's happening. This is just my opinion. But what I think happens is that, when you're having medical uncertainty, there's a lot of anxiety around uncertainty. And I am one person, I do not like uncertainty myself. So anxiety around that, I get 100%. But then when there's something concrete that you can control, that control then just improves a sense of control, which leads to a improved wellness, and then just feeling better. And as I say, if people go onto a restricted diet, they feel better, then that reinforces, hey, food is really an issue for me. Now, there very well could be, like when that person goes onto a restricted diet, there very well could be a food sensitivity to which that they did improve, and there was a biological improvement. So I'm not denying the fact that we can't, there are biological food sensitivities, but often that can reinforce inaccurate association. So I think there's lots of other reasons, but I'd say those are the three main reasons that I've seen why there's that automatic blaming of food for illness or symptoms.
Mm-hmm. There's again, we see it a lot in practice, people having maybe a problem and wanting to come in and be put on a program or put on a diet or given a meal plan. And there's even this just belief that it will make them feel better. And it's a hard thing to kind of explain and say that the restriction is, or maybe the feel good feeling of restriction is only short term, and trying to figure out what the underlying cause is for the discomfort is a lot more important. Mm-hmm. But I see that all the time where people do feel better, but it's really never long term.
And then to add on to what you said is if a person has a lot of anxiety around food, what should I eat? You can just think how having a meal plan would eliminate that anxiety, right?
Mm-hmm. Until the food that's not on the meal plan.
Yeah, right. And then you feel better, and you're like, okay, yeah, it this is working. It is food, but as you say, then that wears off. Yeah.
Mm. On the kind of topic of stress and anxiety, what is something people might not realize about how stress or fear alone can trigger these physical symptoms?
Yeah, thanks. That's a really good question as well. And that's where that idea of conditioned food sensitivity comes in. So if food becomes a danger cue, and then we eat or think about the food, that can trigger those alarm bells, which again have a physical impact on the body. And also there's more and more evidence coming out about the idea of our body being able to reproduce physical changes based on associations. And it's hard to say into words, but is it okay if I did a little visualization with your audience? So
absolutely.
Okay, so imagine, close your eyes, just take a couple of deep breaths. And imagine that you're in your kitchen standing at the counter, and there's a lemon on the counter. So just pick up that lemon, touch the smooth surface, just kind of feel that oblong shape of the lemon. And on your counter is a cutting board and a knife. So just place your lemon on the cutting board. And take the knife and slice through the middle and kind of watch that juice kind of glint on the knife. Kind of take a deep breath and smell that citrusy scent that kind of floats up from the lemon. Now pick up the lemon, just take it up to your mouth, kind of tilt your head back. Just squeeze a little bit of the juice onto your tongue. So most people, when they go through this visualization, they salivate. Did you find that?
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah. You're not imagining saliva, right? You're not a lot of times people think, oh, a conditioned food sensitivity is imagining symptoms. In this visualization, you didn't imagine that there's more saliva in your mouth. You actually salivated. And so it's a good demonstration how when our body has a memory, so it has that association, it can actually reproduce the physiological changes based on that association.
That is interesting. Very interesting.
Yeah, so that can happen with fear. Like if another really good example too is, let's say you get sick, you have applesauce and you get sick. You have a flu phase, say for example. Chances are good when next time you see applesauce, you will feel nauseous. Right? That's normal. Like we all have experienced that. So that's actually like, like a conditioned taste aversion. So it, like what we're talking about with conditioned food sensitivity isn't a weird thing. It's not a psychological disease. It is something that is innate in our brains. It's part of how our brains work.
I can think of a time when I was going into labor. I was going to have a meal right before we go to the hospital, and I'm not going to say what the meal is because it's too graphic, but it didn't last with me when I went into labor, and I cannot think or look at that food. Still, it's 12 years later. Very much a conditioned response. It makes sense. So if someone has been eating only a handful of safe foods for years because of what's been happening around the conditioned responses, how do they even start to expand again without panic? Like, I know if I really wanted to go back to that food that I feel a little bit repulsed about from 12 years ago, I feel like I could set my mind to it and do it. I just don't care enough, and I'm okay to just never have it again. But if someone's food list of accepted foods has dwindled down and it might be impacting their health, how does somebody start expanding again without panic?
So I see it in two phases, and this is how I work with clients. Is the first step really is rebuilding that food and body trust. When people jump into reintroducing food and they're still stuck in that mindset, we talked about that blame between food and illness, and they're still stuck in that mindset. If they introduce a new food and then they feel off, they'll probably blame the food. And that then it reinforces that food sensitivity. And so quite often, just jumping into reintroduction ends up putting you further in the hole than it does helping you get out. So I often take at least, 2 or 3 weeks of work of rebuilding body and food trust and breaking that automatic association that it's food, right? And then with food reintroduction is a slow, gradual approach works for most people. I wish I could say this is how you do it. But, it was funny. I used to make up these detailed reintroduction plans for people. And I would have my appointments, usually we'd be about 6 weeks apart. And so I would give them like the full 6 weeks, do. And the ones that were most successful came back with their own plan. So now I simply give people the tools to make their own plans. But I would say in general, for most people, is starting with like a slow, gradual reintroduction and just sitting with the discomfort. Because if you've been on a really restricted diet and you start to reintroduce food, chances are good you will not feel well for a while because your body hasn't been processing it. That doesn't mean you have a sensitivity to that food. It's just the body hasn't been processing those foods. So if somebody restricts for another reason, like let's say they're even let's say, off on a hike for, a year or something like that, right? And they have a limited number, they're eating gorp for a year or whatever, right? When they come back and they start to reintroduce their other foods, they're probably going to have some digestive upset and whatnot, just as their body gets used to it. So it's really then sitting with that discomfort and, and part of, like when I talked about step one, part of that step is sort of learning to take a bit of a step back from it. And that's, again, the stepping back is part of that automatic, like if we have that automatic assumption, it's like, boom, automatic, right? But when I say stepping back, like minimizing that automatic reaction, we're really talking about stepping back and taking a more objective look at what's happening. So, when introducing a new food and then experiencing those symptoms, really thinking, is it this new food, or is it something else? And it could be the new food. Like, I'm not saying it's not, right? Because as you pointed out so well, Susan, is this process is really sorting out those restrictions, which are truly beneficial, from those that are just excessive. And so, yeah, it might be that new food is not working. That's possible, but just not automatically making that assumption.
Yeah. No, I agree. To maybe start wrapping things up, if someone is listening and thinking, this really sounds like me, what would be maybe one small realistic first step they could take? And then maybe can you also tie in a little bit about your 6-week program?
Sure. So and there's so many things, and you'd asked me this, like to think of one thing, and I really, so I went back and forth with a whole bunch of different things, but I would say the key, a really important shift is what I would call self-compassionate distress tolerance. And that's exactly what we talked about with the food reintroduction, but especially when a person feels ill, right? Because typically what happens is we start to feel ill. That alone, those sensations, sets off alarm bells, and that can lead to a whole flurry of thoughts like, oh, how what's going to happen? Am I going to be able to go to the meeting later? How am I going to feel tonight? Oh, why is this happening? What food could be causing it? So a whole flurry of thoughts can happen. And then also unhelpful actions, like deciding, oh, it's got to be the carrots. I'm going to cut the carrots out. Oh, I'm going to go to the internet. I need to figure this out. And then research that ends up putting you further down the rabbit hole. I better, get some food sensitive, whatever, like a whole. So there's the thoughts, and then there's the unhelpful actions that can happen. But if, like, in that moment, there can be a pause of distress tolerance. Okay, this sucks. And I'm not saying like, oh yeah, no, this isn't bad. It's good. Yeah. No, I'm okay. Like, I'm not talking positive thinking, right? But just saying, yeah, this sucks and I hate this. I don't like it, but it's here. And more bringing that whole somatic experiencing, which is a whole nother topic, but that bringing the attention to what's actually happening versus away from what's happening in the brain, right? All of the thoughts. And then bringing in that self-compassion with some self-care, like deep, gentle breathing. Now, deep, gentle breathing isn't going to make the symptoms go away probably, but it's going to help them from escalating, because again, part of this whole flurry that I talked about with the thoughts and the unhelpful actions is, as all of that's going on, symptoms are, going from a 3 to a 10 kind of thing. So it's probably that breathing isn't going to, take away it, but it can help really minimize that 3 to 10. So just bringing in that self-care. And there's a saying that is coming to my mind, but I can't quite something. Do you have the patience to let the mud settle and then take helpful action? I think something like that. Don't quote me, but just to let it settle. Like, that shift alone can be wonders. And I think talking about that isn't just food sensitivity, right? It's actually, I don't myself have any food sensitivities, yet developing this program has made an enormous difference in my life, right? Because I've applied it to it's like a lot of it is based on my personal experience, even though I don't have food sensitivities, right? Because this is much bigger than just food sensitivities, like that, that ability to pause for a little bit before reacting is our whole life, right? Mm-hmm. So yeah, if I could cap, that would be one of, if I could give, and having said that, like you said, one realistic, like self-compassionate distress tolerance is fairly easy to understand. A challenge to put into practice consistently, right? And myself, as I'm 57, with every year, get a little bit better, but I'm sure I'm till my dying days I will be working on it, right? Like it's not a just, oh yeah, okay, I'll do that, boom, I'm done. Like it's definitely a journey. Okay, so that's me rambling. The other part was the 6-week course. So I have a course called Soften Food Sensitivity Fear. So it is an online program, and how I developed it is when I would talk with clients, and there would be like those little gold nuggets, like just, well, think about it from this perspective. And sometimes it wasn't just what I said, it was what the client said, right? And I was like, oh, yeah. And then after each of those, when I would see clients, then I would write out those gold nuggets, and all those gold nuggets eventually became the what is the course, right? And so my participants go through the 6-week course. And then we also have a group forum, and it's like a private within the website, so that people can share what's happening and then also realize what's happening for other people. And that is the number one positive comment about the course is feeling a part of a community and realizing I'm not alone. A lot of people, and these are the clients' words, not mine. I don't feel crazy anymore is one of the most common comments that people make, and I think that comes from that group dynamics, and realizing that a lot of other people are going through the same thing. Yeah, so that's the 6-week course. And then people have, and it's not to say after the 6 weeks, that's the end of the journey. There's often, it produces that foundation to continue, for weeks, maybe months, reintroducing food, but it provides that foundation on how to go about it and that confidence to do that. And then people have continued access to the resources for an additional 6 weeks, and then they can continue access if they want, but they really don't need it, because once you have that foundation, you've got it, right? You don't need to be continuously going back to it. And I start a new group on the first day of each month. And if people, when they sign up, they get immediate access to the bonus resources and to the week one, so that they can, and week one is the self-compassion strategies. And so they can get started as soon as they sign up.
Well, excellent. This is very, very helpful, because I know we see a lot of people with these food sensitivities and then limited pattern of eating that's developed because of it. And if people want to learn more about your program, where would they go?
Well, my website is Fast Freedom Program, and then under client programs, can't remember the exact word. Yeah, client programs is Soften Food Sensitivity Fear, so they can find it there. And then my contact information is on the website. And also I'll do for your listeners a 20% coupon code, which and you'll have that then in the show notes as well.
Oh, excellent. That's great to hear. So yeah, I'll put all of the links and resources to your website and to your program in our show notes below. And if they want to reach out to you, they can do so. But this has been really helpful. I really appreciate you hopping on the call. So thank you very much. And for everyone that's listening, we'll see you in the next episode.
Yeah, and thank you so much for this opportunity. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks for joining me on A Little Nutrition Talk Radio. I hope today's conversations left you feeling informed, empowered, and ready to approach your health with confidence and self-compassion. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe so you never miss an update. And if you found value in our discussion, I'd love for you to leave a review. It helps others find the show and join in on these important conversations. For more support and resources, visit A Little Nutrition Inc. online at www.alittlenutrition.com. You can also follow us on social media for more insights on intuitive eating, mental wellness, and evidence and lived experience-based healthcare. Until next time, take care, be kind to yourself, and remember, your health journey is yours to define. See you in the next episode.